Pat Murray.
Thank you. If you'd bow your heads, please. Gracious Lord, we come this afternoon doing the work of the city and our people. We invite your guidance and support as we make decisions and have thoughts, words, and deeds, hoping they will be pleasing to you. Be with each person in this room and those outside the doors of this room as we consider how best to do the work of Kerrville. In Christ's name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, item number 1 is a welcome, and I welcome those of you that are here from staff and in the room, and those who are out there in Zoom land or in TV land watching these proceedings of this meeting of the Tirz board. Item number 2 is the nomination and election of a vice chairman, and so at this time I will accept nominations.
I nominate Mindy Wenderly.
All right, there's a nomination.
I'll second that.
I also will.
Nomination and a second. Let's first ask Mindy, would you,
Thank you, John, and yes, I'd be happy to serve.
very good, all right.
Don't ever go on vacation, though.
Any further discussion or any further nominations, I should have said. All right, nominations will cease at this time, and we will vote on the nomination of Mindy Wenderly as our vice chairman. All those in favor, raise your right hand. That is unanimously approved. Okay. Moving on to item 3.3a, which are the approval of the Tirz board minutes, January 14th of 2020. You should have received those in an email as well as have those in front of you. Not sure, since none of us were in that meeting, how that goes for us, just formality.
They have to be approved.
Okay.
The council is obviously the board at that time, if they aren't any longer, so they can't approve it. So.
All right, you kind of heard how that went, so I will entertain a motion to approve.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes of the January 14th, 2020 Tirz meeting.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Just a comment reaffirming that this board was not present at that meeting, but taking on good faith that the actions were appropriately recorded, and we'll approve that.
So noted. All right, with that change to those motions and that second, we'll take a vote. All those in favor, raise your right hand. That passes unanimously as well. All right, item number 3B is to schedule our next meeting. So are we going to have a certain day and time that the room is available for us to use?
What I would suggest is that perhaps you skip this item and have the orientation so that you can kind of look at what might be ahead of you to determine what your meeting schedule might be. Because it might be that you don't want to meet monthly, maybe quarterly, it may be less than that. So.
Okay. Good idea. So everybody good with just tabling that until we know a little bit more about it? All right. We'll move on to item 4.4a, which is the Tirz board orientation. Who will be hosting?
I'll kick it off, and then I'll turn it over to Mike, and then Amy's here also on budget items, and I've got some items I want to present. Go over the items that are either in front of you or were sent to you previously. I know that when you all were first appointed, I sent you several links as well to get some background about the history of the creation of the Tirz. Most of you are familiar with all that. But it's worth noting, and of course this is all being viewed by the public, and it's a good reminder. So I think probably the best thing to do is to start with Mike and do more of the legal pinnings behind the creation of the Tirz and what that all means and kind of the do's and don'ts. So Michael, you'll take it away.
Well, good afternoon. I love starting meetings like Mr. Murray did a few seconds ago, where he gave a disclaimer and talked about good faith. So this is good company, although I'll say something about Ms. Wendley and Mr. Murray, that I thought we had this understanding that when there was retirement, that you all would take me with you. I'm kind of disappointed about that.
But we're both still working, right, Matt?
Yes.
Probably harder than ever. The other thing, here's my disclaimer. This is orientation, and it's really also an orientation for me. I've never been part of a Tirz. You know, I had to live the creation of it, and I had to put together some ordinances and, you know, go through the law. But this is, you know, a good orientation for me. I'm not an expert. This is named Tirz number 1 for the city of Kerrville for a reason, because it is number 1. And, you know, other than setting it up and reviewing the law, I haven't, you know, gone through, you know, really what a Tirz board, you know, does with boots on the ground. So keep that in mind. And the other thing too is I'm not a numbers guy, so my presentation won't be about any of the good stuff about the tax and, you know, how much that's collected every year and what we estimate that. That'll be these guys and gal behind me. So with all that said, that's my disclaimer. See if we can get this going. It's on. I'm pointing it everywhere. Well, anyway, I'll maybe when you figure it out, and I'll go ahead and start. There is constitutional authority. You know, you kind of start there. Whenever I do research, you know, I either look at our charter, which is our constitution for the city, as Mr. Harrison knows, or if I do anything else that I'm really not aware of, I try to dig into. Thank you. I try to dig into what the constitutional authority is, and so this is captured in our Constitution, as was added in '81. So the legislature, by general law, may authorize an incorporated city or town to issue bonds or notes to finance the development or redevelopment of an unproductive, underdeveloped, or blighted area, and I'll talk about that in a second, within the town or the city, and to pledge for repayment of those bonds or note increases in ad valorem tax revenues imposed on that property. So again, that's what we start with, and there is constitutional authority for this. Creation of the tax increment reinvestment zone. So we find our legislative authority through Chapter 311 of the Texas Tax Code, which is entitled Tax Increment Financing Act. And so you'll see that sometimes in literature, TIF, what a TIF is and how that's different from the Tirz. It's not. That's just that the zone is created out of this statute, which is the TIF Act. And as we go through this, you'll see there's lots of process, lots of findings that needed to be made. And I think it's important also to note, so the city didn't just come up with the idea for a Tirz out of thin air. I mean, we really captured state law and availed ourselves to that authority. And as you all may know, I think certainly Mark knows this and EA knows this, there are Tirzes all over the state, and some cities have multiple Tirz. I know when I was in Houston, you know, I think I lost track at 10 or something when I was there. And so cities can't have more than one, which is why you define the area and you name it a particular name, and you go from there. I know when I was, this may not mean anything to you, but I know when I was starting out and drafting the ordinance, I literally had to, you know, print out the law, Chapter 311, and go through there and make bullet points of actions that council had to take by virtue of that ordinance, and I kept having to check those off. And it's interesting to me. This is how my life boring is. When I was preparing for this orientation, I found that document, and I remember those times of, you know, really being focused on the law and what council was doing by virtue of the ordinance and checking off all the things they needed to do. So the next slide is a warning, because it's going to be a lot of text. And I generally don't like to put a lot of text into slides, but here we go. So methods of creation. And again, there's lots of process that we had to go through to create our first Tirz. And there's criteria. And this is all out of the state statute, right? So I may not have captured it it here word for word. I did try to condense it as far as I could. But to set up a Tirz, you had to make a finding, or council did, that this criteria existed in some form or fashion. And before we go through it, I'll just also note that you'll see a lot of ors that are bolded and highlighted. That's why, I mean, not all of this had to be true, but we certainly had to capture some of this to provide the basis for the creation of the Tirz, and we did. So when we had council adopt the ordinance, all this language is in the ordinance. So the criteria. So it's for the creation of the zone. Why would you do that? Why would a city do that? Well, we're trying to substantially arrest or impair the sound growth, or the zone. In fact, is the conditions of the zone substantially arrest or impair the sound growth of a city or a county. Counties can create Tirzes or be part of a Tirz. Retard the provision of housing accommodations or constitute an economic or social liability and be a menace to the public health, safety, morals, or welfare in its present condition and use because of the presence of, and here's this list, a substantial number of substandard slum, deteriorated or deteriorating structures, could be commercial or homes, residences, the predominance of defective or inadequate sidewalk or street layout, faulty lot layout in some form or fashion, the deterioration of site or other improvements, tax or special assessment delinquency that exceeds the fair value of the land. I'm not sure we really drilled down into that, but that may be occurring. Defective or unusual conditions of title, or conditions that endanger life or property by fire or other cause, or be predominantly open or undeveloped and because of obsolete platting, deterioration of structures or site improvements or other factors. I mean, that's pretty broad. Substantially impair or arrest the sound growth of basically the city. So we got a little wrapped around the axle on that as we were going through creating the Tirz. You know, when Mark sent that out to you, those videos, I told him in jest I wasn't going to relive that. I've already lived it once. But it was a good, that was democracy in action, and we really, I mean, to say that anyone went through that process and didn't know a little bit more about Tirz would be, I think, hard to say. But all that being said, you know, our creation of a Tirz, our adoption of an ordinance, council's adoption of ordinance, was not some sort of an indictment or judgment of any current properties within our zoned Tirz right now. I would, merely quoting this state law. Okay. In fact, in our ordinance, and I'll read you this part, we actually drop this in. So in our ordinance it says, for purposes of clarification, these findings and declarations are not intended to declare any particular property in the zone as blighted, are not intended to support a finding that the property is a slum or blighted area for purposes of section 2206 of the Texas Government Code, and that would kind of facilitate or be a basis for condemnation. Nor would it require an independent future finding that a property, or it would require independent purpose or finding by the city that a property is actually a slum or blighted area. So we wanted to be upfront, crystal clear that by creation of the zone, we weren't casting aspersions on any particular properties, nor was this kind of a play to get on down the road and then to come in with condemnation. Okay? And again, all of this is right out of the state law. So again, methods of creation, continuing on. So here's some restrictions. The city may not designate a Tirz where 30% of the property is used for residential. So we did have to do the math on that. Or where the appraised value of taxable real property exceeds 50% of total appraised value within the city. So the intent there is not to create some zone that is actually, half of the city's property values. And then again, more findings. Improvements within the Tirz will significantly enhance the value of all taxable real property in the zone. It will be a general benefit. or the development or redevelopment of the property within the Tirz will not occur solely through private investment in the reasonable foreseeable future. Again, some findings that we had to capture within the ordinance. So, part of the creation procedures that we had to go through is we had to adopt and present to council a preliminary reinvestment zone financing plan, and that was a description of the Tirz's boundaries, tentative plans for the Tirz's development, and then an estimate of the general impact of the Tirz on property values and tax revenues within this zone. And we, of course, like I said, I had a checklist, and I was checking them off as soon as council was taking that action. Of course, yeah, go ahead.
Questions as we go, or how do you?
However you want to do it, I'm easy either way.
The question about boundaries, were the boundaries of this Tirz 1, kind of interesting how it's drawn. Is it drawn to stay within the 30% limit, or was there other criteria that made it kind of?
Yes,
Okay, that
it
was.
was, and in fact, we tried not to have any residential at all.
Oh, okay, thank you, that's.
Part of the creation process was we had to hold a public hearing and really discuss, present to council the proposed benefits of the zone, and then, of course, allow anyone that wanted to speak on the subject to voice objections. And there were objections to this creation. And there was notice published in the paper prior to the public hearing. So the zone, it had to be a contiguous area. And there had to be another finding that development of the area would not occur, again, in the foreseeable future solely through private investment. We had to, of course, do a description of the Tirz's boundaries, both. I think I'm sure this went to you all, I think it's a pretty good depiction of exactly where the boundaries are. And as you can imagine, it follows streets, and I think we can all probably make an argument that it follows kind of a natural area that even occurred prior to that within the city. Council had to designate a board of directors and the number, and they did that, and they started out with 5, and they appointed themselves as the board, which they had authority to do. They've amended that a couple times to increase it to 7, and then they actually removed themselves off the board. The board, under the state law, could be as many as 15 or as few as 5. And if, let's just say, the county were ever to decide they'd like to participate in some form or fashion in the Tirz, we would have to allow them to appoint a member. So there is a provision for that in state law. There's also an interesting provision that the senator, our senator and state rep can make appointments, but they both, as I recall, declined to do so and gave us that notice in writing. We had to put, I guess if I were had more time on my hands, I'd go back and figure out the intent of this. But we had to provide within the ordinance. Tirz took effect right away, so you couldn't defer it out, 180 days or anything like that. It had to actually take effect right away. You had to provide for a date of termination, and ours will terminate end of the year 2049. So I'll put this out there right now. I don't think I'll be around. So you'll probably have to find some other legal counsel to get you through that. We had to actually, within the ordinance, name the Tirz and then establish a tax increment fund for the Tirz. Eventually, we had to come through with a separate ordinance that adopted the project plan, or when I say we, I'm speaking for council. Council had to do this. Approve a project plan and a reinvestment zone financing plan, both together. The Tirz board, at the time council, they actually had the authority to approve that first, and then it went to council for adoption by ordinance. And again, more findings. Adopt findings that the plans are feasible and conform to the city's master plan, if any. And of course, we have one, Kirkville 2050, so it had to be aligned with that plan. More about the project plan. The plan must include a map showing the existing uses of real property within the Tirz and any proposed improvements, any proposed changes to zoning ordinances or the master plan or building codes or other ordinances, and a list of estimated non-project costs, like, administrative costs that we thought it would take to gear up. So in terms of the financing plan, a little bit more required under state law. So it has to include the following at a minimum: detailed list of the estimated project costs of the Tirz, including administrative expenses, list of the kind, number, and location of all proposed public works or public improvements within the Tirz, an economic feasibility study, amount of bond indebtedness to be incurred, and I think you all got both of those documents, or the documents combined. Timing, any timing that we had for incurring costs or monetary obligations. The methods for financing all estimated project costs and expected sources of revenues. And then the current total appraised value of taxable real property within the Tirz. And then the estimated captured appraised value of the Tirz during each year of existence. Of course, that's, we had to do some estimation there. And then the duration of the zone. And again, structure and management, state law provides for an appointment of a board, so city council couldn't have stood this up and then run it themselves. It's just city council, they actually had to appoint a board. The board is charged with implementing the project plan, and so it would be good for you all, if you haven't done it already, to look at that plan. The board is appointed by the city as the creating entity, and other participating taxing jurisdictions, if any. No one else has decided to participate. And you all make recommendations to council concerning the administration, management, proposed projects, and you all can talk about that as we move forward in this meeting. And I think this is important too, but the board is not authorized to issue bonds, impose taxes or fees, exercise power of eminent domain, condemnation, or give final approval to the zone's project and financing plan. So recommendations goes to council for any updates to those plans. Well, it wouldn't be a legal presentation with just a reminder of open government, the Texas Open Meetings Act. With respect to your meetings, they fall under that at a minimum our charter. So just take a quorum of the board and deliberation. That's a meeting. And so I just remind all the boards that I get to appear before that, you just wouldn't want to be, huddled in a corner, four of y'all definitely talking about Tirz. Not that I think any of y'all will want to do that in your free time, but you just want to be aware of that. We post these meetings 72 hours in advance. Email can be a meeting, so sometimes staff will send out some sort of information to you all in an email. Most of the time, they try to blind copy the board on that so that there's no accidental reply all. But we ask that you don't reply all, because arguably you could actually have a virtual meeting. If someone replies all and then a couple more people reply all, and then there's essentially some deliberation and some thoughts that are going into some particular issue. And I'm always reminding folks of the civil and criminal penalties for that statute. Texas Public Information Act, two points here. It's really easy, I think, for y'all. Everything we create for this board, or you create, is arguably subject to the Open Records provision, Public Information Act. And that includes your devices. And so if you get an email back from the city, and by all means on your device, email back, because we'll capture that email within our system. But I would not email anyone else about a Tirz issue outside of our system unless you print off that email and give it to us, because there is a requirement that we retain that and, of course, produce that if asked. The other two slides I threw in there because as I was going through this, I started making notes and I threw them in there, and I told EA I was just going to gloss over this because this is beyond, they'll tell me to stay in my lane. But here's the benefits of the Tirz that I certainly see, and I think folks in this room will see. It finances the construction of needed public infrastructure within a defined area, of course. It encourages development, which I think is what we're really looking to do, and thus increasing property values and long-term property tax collection. And it reduces the developer's cost of development by providing reimbursement for eligible public improvements. And so, again, as we go through this, and the fund has some money, just like the EIC or 4B Corporation, they'll presumably come to me and say, hey, can we spend money on this kind of type of project? And I'll have to drill down into the statute and make sure that, yes, we can. Examples of Tirz improvements, and if I were a better presenter, I would have had nice pictures of these, but I think you can figure it out. Improvements to roads. Cities use Tirz to improve roads within the zone, sidewalks, drainage, and other infrastructure. They'll do structure remediation or demolition, perhaps do a facade improvement program. So based on some sort of parameters and guidelines, a business could come in and say, hey, I'd like to tap into the Tirz funding. I'd like to create some sort of better facade for my property. New street signs, that's what I'm most familiar with, at least out of the gate. A lot of Tirzes immediately do that. And landscaping improvements or working on park areas. Affordable housing is certainly, you could do that. Any public improvements is in essence to increase or create more livable, walkable community. I mean, I think we've all realized over particularly, I've been here a long time, but certainly in the last 10, 15 years, what, the focus we need to have, Mr. Early knows this, on kind of creating a livable city, quality of life, and that's what a Tirz can really help the city and this community to do. So that's the end of my presentation. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try to address those. If not, I'm just an email or a phone call away. I'm happy to help whenever I can.
Thank you, Mike. So what I want to talk about is the actual plan, project and financing plan. Looks like this. Okay. And I won't go page by page. There's a lot of like legal descriptions of property boundaries and so forth in here, but I just want to provide an overview and have a little bit of discussion with you all and answer questions. So Mike mentioned it. I think that the whole idea of a Tirz came out of Gov't 2050. And looking at the downtown chapter, it's actually an action item in there. So we made it an early action item, even before the Gov't 2050 plan was adopted. So we pressed forward with that, trying to put something in place as soon as possible, because the sooner that you had that Tirz in place, the sooner that you were going to have an increment that you could capture, and you can be growing this thing over the 30, 31 years. So the other thing that is interesting that you'll find out is the boundary of the Tirz is now the same boundary for Main Street program. And that's so that there can be some synergy between the efforts of Main Street, what they're trying to do, and then what you all are trying to do. And I mentioned to Kenneth before the meeting started that at some point, sooner rather than later, y'all as a board will need to appoint one of you to the Main Street Board as an ex officio member, just so that everybody's working, hand in hand on downtown redevelopment. We did hire a consultant to do this for us, somebody I had worked with previously in Tyler and elsewhere for the creation of the Tirz. He helped us put the project plan together. Mike mentioned that many cities have more than one. In Dallas, we had 22. In Tyler, we had 2. So it's not an uncommon thing. The other thing is, most of the time you will see it used as a redevelopment tool. You won't see it necessarily as a greenfield type of tool. So sometimes, even here recently, I've had developers approach me and say, hey, we want to put in this new development, but would we all create a Tirz for us and then give us all the increment, the tax increment, to help pay for the infrastructure? And my answer is usually no. That's a greenfield project, needs to stand on its own, but where we need a catalyst for redevelopment in an existing part of town that has not been able to get past go because of redevelopment issues and the costs associated with that, the Tirz becomes one of those tools, not just the only one, but one of those tools to help redevelopment happen. And oftentimes, as you're going to see in the financing plan, it takes a little while to get enough money to do anything with it. But one of the first things that developers ask us when they come in for redevelopment, like a hotel or something like that, they'll say, well, do you have a Tirz in place? And when you say yes, well, great, we don't have to go through that process to create a Tirz. So it's a tool that they know, the industry knows about, and it's an attractive tool. We had a choice of capturing a percentage of the increment. It didn't have to be 100%. The ultimate decision was the 100% of the increment. Some cities do like 75%, so that the other 25% still goes to general fund. Like a county may jump in and say, well, we want to participate, but not at 100%. So those choices were made that we wanted 100% capture. We also had the choice of capturing sales tax in addition to property tax. And so in Tyler, we did that in our downtown. We captured the sales tax as well. It's a very difficult thing to measure the increment as businesses come and go, but we did that. We decided not to do that here because we needed the sales tax to continue to go to general fund to just fund the city services. And then the other thing, as months go on and years go on, you have the option to amend the boundary. These boundaries are not fixed, and I have done that before, where a developer comes along and says, hey, I'm just right on the border of your Tirz. I'd like to be able to benefit from that, and also for my increment to benefit the Tirz. And so we amended the boundary, and we brought them in. So that's possible to do that if we had somebody that had an interest in doing that. So the first page of the document kind of just shows the boundary. Then you got a table of contents. The boundary again on the actual page 1, which is 3 pages in. You heard Mike talk about that the governing body may not authorize the board to issue bonds, impose taxes or fees, exercise the power of an eminent domain, or give final approval on the project plan. So back when this was created, there was concern that, this was an issue, this was a way for the city to exercise eminent domain. We made it quite clear that that's not what we were doing. In fact, state law prohibits cities from using eminent domain for economic development purposes. There was case law on that, then the legislature changed the law, so we cannot do that for economic development. Let's see. Let's get back to the project plan, some more detail after we get through all the boundary description. So page 11, well, first of all, 10, there's 574 parcels, so it's a lot of parcels. And the estimated taxable value at the time of creation was a little over 99 million. On the next page, page 11, not knowing what kind of the needs were going to be, and typically what happens is it's private sector driven, but a lot of times the city might have an idea about, we want some infrastructure improvements as well. To give you an idea about what that might be, we really need to do something about the sidewalk system in downtown. We got those old bricks that are, deteriorating. We've got trip hazards. We need wider sidewalks in some places. We need a better connection all the way to the east end and other places. And so that might be a project that is city-driven, but at the time of the creation of the Tirz, there's no way of knowing exactly what you want to do for all of this boundary area. So what cities will do with the help of their consultant is create categories of expenditures, and that's what we did here. So, there's 10% is going to be this, 15% is going to be that, and so forth. These are not set in stone. These can be amended. And every year, you kind of affirm the project plan or do a report. And so this can be amended at any time. In fact, it can be amended at your next meeting if you had a prospect that wanted to spend money differently. Okay, so it's flexible, but it has to have at least some idea about what those might be. These categories, these percentages, came from what other cities have done in the past and kind of the direction that they have gone. Doesn't mean that Kerrville's going to do that. So it's just kind of give you an idea about what the categories might be. Then beginning on page 12, you see how the consultant came up with a projection on what the increment was going to be. Sometimes cities do this and those plans never materialize. And then other times they do this, and like when I was in Corpus Christi, we created one out on the island, and it has totally exceeded expectations. What they do is they look at vacant parcels where opportunities might be for redevelopment, and they go parcel by parcel, and they give some projections about what that development might be and how many square feet, and what's the value of that square feet, when it might be completed. And so they took a shot at this. This was their crystal ball. It's not, they're not brilliant at predicting the future, but they've made an attempt here based upon the information that they have to create some projections. Amy's going to get up here in a minute and tell you how we're tracking with these projections so far. And then on the next page, it just shows you the entities and their tax rates. Again, as Mike mentioned, the city is the only one that's participating on real property tax. So like when we do our report, when we update this report, assuming the council adopts a lower tax rate that we proposed, then the 5514 will change. Okay, and then I won't go into all these very small numbers on the remaining pages, but this is just a lot of detail about how the consultant got to his projections. I think you can see how on page 16, in the early years, you're really not capturing a lot of revenue. The other idea here is that if we're using the Tirz as a catalyst for redevelopment of downtown and the other entities are not participating, they're basically just benefiting from the city creating this zone, because the idea is that it's going to supercharge some development that would not have occurred otherwise. And so that's the projection on who would be benefiting from the Tirz. It's just some more repeat on the next few pages, and then an actual listing of every single parcel in the Tirz begins on page 18, and the base taxable value, and this is from the appraisal district. They've got every one of these properties tagged as being inside the Tirz, and they track that every year. And so when we get a certified roll, we get two rolls. We get one for the whole city, and we get one for the Tirz. And I haven't said this, and I think you all know this, but I'll say it anyway, we're just talking about capturing the increment. And that's why this base year is so important. So it's any growth in values. Nothing that was already there in 2018 cannot be captured. It's just any growth in values since 18, not just new construction like the HEB that's going in or the Broadway Bank. That's all new that's going into the Tirz. But it's also increases in appraisals just by natural growth in property values on existing property. Okay. I think that's it. Yeah. So I'm going to stop unless there's any questions so far, and then I'm going to have Amy come here and talk about where we are today on our projections and for the annual report. I think that's another document that you have with you. But any questions at this point? Yes, Brett.
You said that a developer may come and ask that we change the boundaries or look at a particular city to do some infrastructure. Logistically, how does that work? Because I would imagine that it doesn't come directly to Tirz, it's coming through somewhere else.
Right. They usually come to the city staff. And then we are your support staff, and we'll bring it to you all and say, hey, do y'all want to do this? This is what they're wanting to do and how that would work. But it doesn't mean that, just in your being out and about with the people that you know, that you might be approached as a board member. They might know you're a board member, and you just bring it to us and we'll look at it. Other ideas or questions? All right, Amy, why don't you come on up and fill us in on finance.
Afternoon. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual numbers involved in the increment. And I want to start with a little bit of an explanation about exactly what the increment is and how it's calculated. So I think y'all all have the basic idea, but then it gets a little bit more complex. So as of 2020, our 2020 tax roll, we have 580 parcels now in the Tirz. 2018 was our base tax year. So that 2018 tax year, what we did is everything that was collected that year goes to the city, to the general fund and the debt service fund, just as usual. And then in subsequent years, we start looking at what were the tax collections for the 2019 year, 2020 year, and we just compare it back to that 2018 base year, and we take the difference. And this one thing that I think is a little complicated when looking at some of these forms that the state requires us to put in, a certain format and disclose certain information is that they're really focused on this like captured appraised value, taxable value, and looking at the increment in terms of the change in value. But the actual increment that goes into the Tirz fund is just the difference in property tax collected this year versus property tax in the base year. And especially when we're in a city like Kerrville where we have changing tax rates almost every year, you can see that like the plan that Mark just showed you, our tax rate is not 5514. It wasn't 5514 last year. We're proposing a third decrease in 4 years this year. So changing tax rate changes things, changing exemptions within the Tirz boundaries changes that number as well. Then also we have the over 65 tax freeze in Kerrville, and that changes things too. And the state really has a hard time with how to report taxable value when it's frozen. So what we've done is we've worked with the appraisal district and with Kerr County, who does the tax collections for the city. And we've broken it down to what I think is a really simple way to look at it. But we just look at actual dollars collected. So we know that in the base year, we collected $542,237 in Tirz property taxes for the city. So that's our base, $542,000. Then we look at the next year, 2019. We're collecting 2019 taxes in 2020. We look at that year and what we actually collected. That also factors in collection rate. If someone doesn't pay the tax, even if there's an increment in the value there, that shouldn't go to the Tirz fund because we never collected the tax. So we just look at actual tax collected compared to the base year actual tax collected, and that's what we transfer over to the Tirz fund. The timing of it it's kind of a very delayed process, so I want to make sure y'all understand that as well. So January 1st, the appraisal district comes out and appraises value. That value gets set in a certified tax roll in July. Then you get your property tax bill in October. That property tax bill isn't due until the end of January. We also in Kerr County offer the option to do a split pay. So we have a lot of taxpayers that choose to pay their property tax in 2 pieces. So that means their due date doesn't happen until June 30th. So it's like June 30th of that next year before the increment from the previous year is actually in and collected. So that's what we just passed. This June 30th, 2020 was when our taxes were finally due for the 2019 tax year. So as of right now, we have a little over $18,000 in increment for our first year in increment. And so we've collected that money. We've moved it over to the Tirz fund. We move it over after that last June 30th due date. We're now also planning on, we still have some people that are paying, but paying late. So we're going to move over a little bit more before the end of our fiscal year, which is September 30th. So we're projecting that we'll have about $20,000 in increment as of the end of this fiscal year, and that'll be in the Tirz fund. We did not have any expenditures planned for that, so no expenditures coming out. It will be earning a little bit of interest income, although not much, but a little bit. It is invested. So that's what we have going on. In our initial projections for the base year, we got a certified roll from the appraisal district that calculated out to about $30,000 in increment, and we thought that that's what we had budgeted for this year is $30,000, a little over $30,000 in increment. And then it turns out that we had some property, I think specifically the Arcadia, that had an exemption for a not-for-profit exemption that was retroactively placed on, but wasn't in place when we received the certified tax roll. So by the time we adjusted for some things like that, it's looking like it's going to be more like 20,000 is what we're estimating for the year. Looking at 2021, fiscal year 2021, which will be tax year 2020, we're estimating a higher amount. We're looking at a little over $49,000 in increment as the estimate. Just in terms of those appraised values and taxable values, just because you may hear those terms thrown around, since the base year appraised value has increased from 128 million to 151 million in the Tirz, so an increase of 23 million. Taxable value increased from 100 million to 118 million. Once again, this is a little funny because of the freeze, so even if it's frozen, it's the way it's presented in taxable value doesn't take into account that freeze. So anyway, those are pretty healthy numbers. So that's just growth in value over these 2 years, and probably just in your own taxes that you've received, you've seen similar growth in value as well. So anyway, that's what we're looking at from our process, and kind of as a Tirz board, what to expect on an annual basis is like I said, our fiscal year ends September 30th. After that year end, we do all our year end accounting and financial reporting. And last year, it was January of last year that the Tirz board held a meeting for their annual report. And during that annual report meeting, which you'll see a copy of last year's annual report in your packet today, that's where we'll go through exactly how much increment was collected and what the what the projections are for the current fiscal year. But it is a little bit difficult because the calendar is a little different than the city's budgeting calendar. Because right now we're setting the city's budget for fiscal year 2021 that starts October 1st through September 30th of 2021. And we set the budget for all city funds. City council votes on the budget for all city funds. So you'll see at the last page of, of the annual report that looks like this. Last page of the annual report is the proposed budget for the Tirz for fiscal year 21. It's part of the whole proposed budget book that looks like this for the city. It's available online. It was published July 31st. But you'll see that we had originally projected 30,000 for the current fiscal year. We've lowered that to 20 now that some new exemptions are in place. And then next year we're projecting the 49,461 as the property tax revenue, and with a little bit of interest revenue, and there are no expenditures currently planned. And then that's where the Tirz board would come in. If there are specific things, this budget can be amended during the year, but at this point, there's no plans for that. But that would leave almost $70,000 in increment by the end of 2021 in that Tirz fund. I think those are the main highlights. Anything else? Any questions?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So do the increments stack on top of each other?
Yes, they do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what that 70 is, the 20 from this year plus the 50 from next year. And it does just continue to grow. And so to your point, you can, save up for something basically. And there's no requirement that this budget be balanced. So it doesn't have to be that, only what you get this year can you spend this year. If you have money from previous years that's not spent, you can have an unbalanced budget for this fund.
So the increment itself, it always goes back to 542 as a
Correct.
starting point.
Mm-hmm.
So each year, the increment takes last year and the previous year and the previous year as it goes on and adds it.
It really is just looking at actual dollars collected in the current year. So, if we collect 600,000 in the current year, we compare it to that 542 base year and just look at exactly that. And then what's left in the fund balance is whatever's unspent from prior years. Yeah.
But you'll always get 20 each year because you got it in your first year. As
Unless-
long as
Unless
the
you cut the
increment
tax rate.
continues, the increment each year grows.
The increment would grow
Include
each
the
year unless if property values decreased.
Correct.
And then if if there were significant exemptions, or if we significantly cut the tax rate to where actual taxes collected went down below that 542. We're not anticipating any of those things would happen, but certainly those would impact the magnitude of the increment each year. And, if we cut tax rates, that for sure reduces the amount of the increment each year, or if there's additional exemptions, that kind of thing, so. All right, anything else? Okay.
Okay, one more thing I want to cover now is the downtown chapter of Gov't 2050, just some highlights on that. I won't go page by page or item by item, but, so item D 7.2, you'll see it's several pages in. That's the actual creation of the Tirz. So as I said, that was an early action item right out of Gov't 2050. Right now, the Main Street Board is trying to prioritize this plan. So all these priorities that you see in here, they're developing an annual work plan and a multi-year plan about where they're going to try to focus their efforts. And so they've had now 3 meetings on that. And again, that's why it's good to have somebody from this board on that board so that there's some good communication about what everybody's doing and people are working in the same direction. But to give you an idea about some of the things that they want to see, or the kiosk, a plan for the sidewalks improvements, a facade grant program, or a grant program to help businesses turn back to the river instead of having their backs to the river. And so those could be smaller grants with even the dollars you have today, but as you've heard from Amy, you don't have a lot of money right now. Doesn't mean you can't plan and produce ideas and give input even on items that are not Tirz funded. Maybe they're funded through another source like the EIC. For example, the EIC was going to fund some garage improvements. Well, that's in your boundary area, and so you might have some input on that. Ultimately, EIC does, but y'all might want to give some recommendations. The other thing is, you heard Mike and even me say earlier that you can't issue debt, but a lot of times what cities will do is, because they know they're not going to have much cash early on, is they will issue debt early on, and then layer their back end the payments on their debt, structure it so that larger payments are in the later years, so they can get cash now to do a project. That's not what the vision is here, and that's not what the idea is here. We want to go pay as you go on a cash basis. That could be revisited at some point, but that's when we created it. That was the idea. And then finally, keep in mind that even though you don't have a big increment right now, you may get a big project. So, for example, if another hotel comes in and says, you know what, we want to come in, but we want to benefit from the Tirz, you can do what's called a project-specific grant. Maybe it's for some part of the public infrastructure for that project. So that the increment that they create specifically off of their development, let's say it's a $50 million project, wouldn't that be great? The increment that's created of that $50 million comes here because it's in the capture for that year, and you all can dedicate that increment back to that project. Okay, so it's not like you're just going to be sitting here for 10 years because you have no money. Those things can happen, and you will, in fact, have a little bit of money to do certain things. So it could be project specific, or it could be out of this growing pool that Amy was talking about for anything that was on the list that you saw earlier. Okay, we've been talking a lot, and we want to take any questions y'all have, or maybe y'all want to deliberate on kind of where we go from here and how you would like to proceed.
Mark, as I sort of distill what I'm hearing, our job is really to look at the potential projects and help the city prioritize those in this area of the Tirz. I mean, but we have to listen to how much money there is, because there's no reason to go plan $10 million worth of projects since there's only $500,000. But that's our job, is to look at the potential projects. I would imagine the city already has a long list of potential projects that they would like to see done in the Tirz area.
Yeah, but it would be worthwhile for you all to be thinking about what kind of development you want to see in the downtown. So, you're kind of catalyzing development, the kind of development you want to see. Consistent with Kerrville 2050, all those kinds of things. And right now, there's a study that the Main Street Board is doing using a Retail Connection to look at retail in the downtown and all the vacant spaces, for example, and what sort of things make the most sense in terms of businesses going in there. And then looking at existing businesses around the state and the country that like to be in downtowns and trying to do kind of matchmaking. And so those kinds of things are already going on. But what's the vision, for example, between Tivy and G Street? What is the vision for over to Francisco Lemos? We can have some discussions around those kinds of things as well. So, but yes, John, to your question,
But visioning's a larger aspect than project management. I sort of heard more project management, taking input from the city and other people as to here's projects, and then we help prioritize it to the city council. But if we're going to vision, that's another aspect to this that I hadn't thought of.
It's an important aspect too.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Mark, walk us through your philosophy about facade improvements, facade grants as it relates to Main Street. Will Tirz be their sole source of funding for that? Or
Great question. So we were talking about that at Main Street Board yesterday. The difficulty for the EIC to fund those is because EIC has to fund primary jobs. So I could use the example of, let's just say a new brewery came into town and their product was being shipped and over 50% of it outside of the retail trade area. They would qualify for EIC funding. But most of the time that's not going to happen.
Right.
And so many of the retailers that we have now, they just don't draw that far outside of our region just because they're more local retailers. So it's hard for them to qualify for what used to be that old facade grant program that EIC had. They didn't use it very much because they couldn't get people to qualify for it. So the Tirz would be a great source of funding. The only other source of funding might be the city's general fund, and that's pretty tight right now.
Right.
Doesn't mean it won't be less tight later, but right now it's really tight.
But the relationship between Main Street Advisory Board and Tirz is extremely important. You said in your opening statements about the boundary. So as long as we all know who has what role, because I think that there's a propensity sometime in the general public that when you have these kind of boards, these kind of initiatives, Main Street and EIC, that it's all new. We're coming in with new businesses, new firms, that kind of stuff. But our bread and butter is our existing firms and retailers and so forth. So it's very important to walk that balancing line to make sure that it's all available, qualified, of course, to improvements of existing businesses. I just think it's very important to be able to promote, market, and so forth in that realm with the small business owner.
Right, and so Main Street, as you know, because you've been a part of it, they'll be getting into things like programming and events and promotions and marketing, and they'll do some in the event in the realm of trying to do help with architecture of the outside of a building and different things like that as well. But whereas you all are more focused on, you know, managing the plan and visioning, even though they're visioning as well.
Right.
So it sounds to me like the vice chair of this group should be on the Main Street board too, so that.
Gotcha. Well, something that I think we ought to consider would be have a presentation by someone from the city about their projects inside of Tirz, as well as the Main Street Board. Have those at our next meeting, and then we can see kind of how we fit in between there.
Yeah.
You know, we're really a funding source with no funds at this point, but kind of decide from there what we think we latch on to.
We could do that. We did that yesterday with the Main Street Board. After they prioritized, we gave them an update on all the things that were already going on, because they didn't necessarily know, and it helps to kind of understand how it's all coming together or not coming together. You know, everything from the Harley Hills Heritage Center to cuts to, you know, what are we doing about the sidewalks and the improvements to the elevator over here. I mean, just the whole 9 yards. We can do that. Just kind of give you a rundown of projects that are going on in the downtown, or perspective. You know, the Marriott, what's the status of that? You know, we're looking at redesigning some parking in some areas. So,
I think that in the next month or so, that could be maybe further fleshed out from the perspective of maybe questions that were asked yesterday, and then presentations be made here. So we could have a meeting in a month and then maybe put on the agenda to nominate someone to serve on the board once we kind of hear what is going on. You know, if being on the board has a lot of time involved, that would probably be something that people that are considering that, if they're nominated, might want to know. So that could be a topic that we talk about.
that board meets monthly right now.
But do you anticipate us having a lot of action items to meet more often than?
Not unless you want to do some of the visioning, or if a project's coming in and they want project-specific financing, then that would be kind of an intense time.
Okay.
Just from a calendar standpoint, I mean, I don't, is it necessary that we have regular frequency, or, I'm thinking in terms of, we're late August, we're gonna be 1st of October before we know it, then there's an annual plan report, I guess the consultant helped with that this last.
But it's something we think we can do in-house this year, so we won't have to spend that money.
But there's a fair amount of work that goes behind that, and talking about that plan development. And I'm personally curious about stakeholder input from the property owners in the Tirz. I know there was upheaval initially and a lot of public input provided. Has there been more input?
No, I think there was a lot of misinformation for a variety of reasons.
Yes.
You know, that's part of the reason why I do think it would be beneficial for you all to be meeting, so that, you know, a lot of truth can be put out there.
Yes. But meeting with a purpose, I guess, is my question. And I would see perhaps monthly meetings till December. I don't know, I'm talking off the top of my head, but you know, we're trying to bring this thing out of the ground. We've got some great material that was kind of boilerplate, straw man, we don't know what, but we got to get something on paper. Obviously, that's going to have to be refined, whether it's from the visioning standpoint, certainly from the financial standpoint, with the question, or I guess not the question, the certainty about changing tax rates and what that increment might do. There are just some basic components that I think probably need to be refined and refreshed. between now and the next annual report that maybe I'm the only person on this board that doesn't.
Are you suggesting a monthly meeting until the report comes
Yes.
out?
Yes. Good idea. But with purpose, I mean, not to meet for the sake of meeting, but,
So we can have one next month, we can see, and go from there. What day and of the week and what time are you guys interested
every day's Saturday for me, so.
Like Thursdays?
Thursdays are good for me, morning or afternoon, but not in the middle, so we can get work done.
A month from now is the 17th.
I prefer afternoon personally.
Afternoon works better for me as well.
It's fine.
The 17th is going to be a heavy day for us with our code review committee for our subdivision code that afternoon.
Push it to the 24th, or is that's budget time? I know stuff. Is that?
No, it's after that. The budget should be adopted by September 8th.
September 8th? Wow.
Well, when you're lowering the tax rate, you're not doing anything. 'Cause you have emergency.
Well, I was gonna say overachievers, but
With
we'll
the
go with
joy.
that if you want.
So the 24th,
4 o'clock, 3 o'clock.
I like 4 if that's not too late for everybody.
And then on that agenda will be the two presenters and us nominating someone for the Main Street Board.
okay, 2 presenters.
Wouldn't it be the city as well as Main Street, or is that one thing?
It's 1, yeah.
Wouldn't that be our
Staff can do
presentation?
that, yeah.
Sound good?
Okay, 4 o'clock on the 24th.
And Mark, I did have a question. You had said that we could adjust to add someone into the Tirz district. Can someone also be removed from the district?
Mhm.
Okay. And what is that process like?
Just going through the, almost like you did with, or the council did with the creation ordinance, amending the creation ordinance in the plan.
When you take them out, do you reset the base?
Mhm.
So the 2018
Not
base
the whole,
of,
not the whole base, just that,
Just that, okay, good.
that one
Oh.
parcel comes out.
but the 2018 revenue base stays the same?
Whatever that one parcel paid in 2018.
That comes out. It does come out. Okay. So
Kenneth,
Yes.
can I go back to schedule?
Sure.
In general, can we try to avoid a second or fourth Thursday of the month for a late afternoon meeting? And I get the 17th this month is not a problem, I can adjust. Just don't want that to be every month, the fourth week.
Do you guys,
that a
at the city,
problem?
have something standing that creates a problem with it being the third
No.
Thursday, with exception of the first 17th?
I'm fine with the 24th in September.
Anybody else have an issue with it being the third Thursday? Sounds like that would be fine.
Thank you, Ken.
4 o'clock?
4 o'clock.
Okay. That's all we have, Mr. Chair.
Very good. So, looks like we hit everything on the agenda. Right, anything further to discuss or anything to add to an agenda in the future? All right, I hear none, so we are adjourned.
Thank you.
So.